July 8th, 2016. Chinese UN ground forces find themselves in the middle of a battle between two warring factions in the South Sudanese capital of Juba. The Sudan People's Liberation Army and the People's Liberation Movement are both staging outside Chinese positions. Let's forget about the genocide going on in China right now for a moment and talk about the Chinese humanitarian mission. Since the 1990s, the PLA has been stepping up to the plate in terms of humanitarian missions with the United Nations. When China first came to the UN, they outright refused to be a major player. However, all that has changed in the last 40 years. Instead of sending engineers or agricultural specialists and doctors, now they are sending entire infantry battalions. This battle we are about to talk about shows how poorly trained and disciplined the Chinese PLA is, and for those of you who I'm close with, who know who I am, who are watching this, it confirms what I've been saying about the PLA. Not to showboat, let's start getting into it. So, a little bit of background before we dive in. In 2015, the Chinese do a quick 180 on their quote-unquote non-intervention policy because of some spicy resources in the Sudan. The Chinese have a 40% stake in these Sudanese oil fields, so with that black gold at stake, the Chinese sent 2,500 men to this conflict area. The general Sudan area had been in turmoil because of the Second Sudanese Civil War, which lasted for 22 years, causing 2.5 million casualties, and somehow has not managed to make the narrative-driven, fear-mongering, state-run mainstream media much. In 2011, the South Sudan became an independent nation, and the dirty commies just couldn't keep their grimy hands out of it for long enough to say, finally a little regional stability. So, China arms 5 of the 7 factions which operate in 9 of the 10 South Sudanese states, and then deploys a 700-strong infantry battalion that's 129 officers and 579 soldiers. China's finest are tasked with protecting 2 major protection of civilian sites in the capital of Juba. We'll call them PCSs from here forward, where there are 37,000 displaced civilians sheltering under their protection. What are the chances something heinous is going to happen in a PCS watched by a nation genociding its entire Uyghur population? So with the tasking of covering this massive population area, you would expect lots of presence patrols, guard tower and perimeter duty, as well as mechanized patrols and patrols through the perimeter. But this perimeter is fortified by HESCO barriers filled with sand and rocks, and barbed wire fences with wooden guard posts instead of concrete and pillboxes. So already we're just a massive letdown. And while all this is going on, the SPLA and PLM are digging in and setting up bases right next to the Chinese perimeter around the capital, with all of the hardware that the Chinese sold to them. Massing huge amounts of fighters and tanks, this place already not being well prepared to weather an assault is now situated between 2 groups who are trying to take control of the capital. Both the government SPLA, estimated at about 1,400 soldiers, and the rebel PLM, estimated at just over 1,700, rushed the city, and neither observed the UN rules of engagement, opening fire on civilians caught in the crossfire, and ransacking hospitals and distribution centers. Civilians begin a mass panic stampede, so the Chinese bases in the city now come under fire, and heavy fire, with the Chinese UN troops shooting at the SPLA and PLM, while the 2 of them are shooting at each other through the refugee camps and UN bases. The barbed wire fences are breached, and the Chinese guard towers are destroyed by tanks and machine guns, forcing the Chinese further and further into the city, closer to the PCS sites. Now, the Chinese are blind to what's coming their way, and continue what loosely resembles a fighting withdrawal. The Chinese are hit with massive rocket attacks and artillery fire, so once they retreat and cluster around the few UN-given APCs they had, the 6-wheel UN APCs that don't have shit for armor on them. Anyways, the rebels and government forces whack them with RPGs, and at this point 272 casualties have piled up, and the Chinese have no way to evacuate these casualties. Their APCs are shit and they have no Kazovac. We can also assume that with the count of wounded that the death toll was quite high as well. However, in my research, I have only found 2 KIA. It seems like it's a massive state secret. Anyways, so now the real rampage begins. The PLM starts raiding Chinese aid warehouses and weapons stockpiles and got away with over 30 million in stolen UN goods. So now with enough food stolen to feed 200,000 people for 2 months, they continue the attack. And the Chinese are now pinned down, but the PLM and SPLA are about to just start rampaging through the city, committing unspeakable acts inside the PCS and in Juba itself. Now the civilians are pissed off because their protectors didn't protect them and start to freak out. So the Chinese tear gas them because having your life torn apart twice now wasn't enough. So here's some tear gas because fuck you. And get this, the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs said, and I quote, "Chinese officers, soldiers, and peacekeepers remained at their posts."
I don't remember asking you a goddamn thing.
Mind you, they only protected 9,000 of the 200,000 they were supposed to, and on top of that, they then tear gassed them for having a bad day and having something to say about it. But yeah, some commies got wiped by 12-year-olds with guns, but the commies insist they did a good job, and that it would have been worse. What do you think? If you guys like this style of video, be sure to give it a like and comment down below. This was just something that I did a deep dive into, went down a little bit of rabbit hole, and wanted to make something about it.